This is also a time of change for my family. Catherine becomes Queen Consort. In recognition of her own loyal public service, I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely.
Something unusual began to move through royal discussion when reports suggested that Princess and the Princess Royal had become connected to a deeply sensitive question about King Charles III's hopes for the future. Not a public announcement, not a formal constitutional change, but a private-sounding claim about trust, duty, and whether Prince William, the Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, are now seen as the monarchy's safest path forward. For a family built on ceremony, timing, and carefully measured language, even the suggestion of such a moment carries enormous weight. Because when royal observers speak about a king's wish, they are not simply speaking about personal affection. They are speaking about legacy. They are speaking about the emotional direction of the crown. And they are speaking about the quiet pressure that gathers around the people who may one day be asked to carry the monarchy through its next great transformation. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed any private instruction, sealed message, or formal wish from King Charles III naming William and Catherine as anything beyond their existing constitutional future. That distinction matters. Prince William is already the direct heir to the throne, and Catherine is already expected to become Queen Consort when her husband becomes king. But the reason this story has captured attention is not because it changes the law of succession. It is because if the reports and commentary surrounding it are accurate, it may reveal something more emotional and more revealing. Who the king believes can preserve the monarchy's trust when tradition alone may no longer be enough. And this is where Princess Anne becomes so important, and has always occupied a unique place inside the royal story. She is not the monarch. She is not the heir. She is not a figure who usually seeks the center of public attention. Yet for decades, the Princess Royal has represented something many royal watchers believe the institution depends on more than glamour: discipline, endurance, directness, and duty without performance. She is often viewed as the royal who keeps going when others become symbolic, the one who serves without demanding applause, and the sister who understands King Charles III not only as sovereign, but as family. So when her name becomes linked to a claim about the king's deeper hopes for William and Catherine, the story immediately feels different. Had such a suggestion been attached to a courtier, it might have sounded like palace noise. Had it come through anonymous speculation alone, it might have faded quickly into another cycle of royal rumor. But because Princess Anne's public image is so closely tied to loyalty and seriousness, the idea that she may know something about the king's private concerns gives the whole story a sharper edge. Still, the question remains, was this truly about a final wish, or is it really about the monarchy preparing emotionally for the future everyone knows is coming? That question sits at the heart of this unfolding royal discussion. Because beneath the dramatic wording, there is a real and visible shift that no palace statement can completely hide. Over the past several years, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, have increasingly come to represent the next chapter of the monarchy in the public imagination. Their appearances are studied not only as royal events, but as previews. Their body language is read as reassurance. Their family image is interpreted as continuity. Their ability to remain calm under intense public scrutiny has become part of the wider story of how the monarchy may survive beyond the reign of King Charles III. And that is why this moment matters. It is not because William and Catherine's future roles are a surprise. They are not. It is because the emotional center of the monarchy may already be moving toward them before the crown itself has changed hands. That is a much more delicate matter. For any reigning monarch, the future must be prepared without making the present appear weak. The heir must become visible without seeming impatient. The next queen must grow in authority without appearing to step beyond her place. And the wider family must adjust to a new balance of attention without admitting that anything has shifted at all. This is where the tension becomes more personal. Queen Camilla remains beside King Charles III as his wife and queen consort, and her role has been formally established through years of public duty and careful acceptance. Yet according to some royal commentators, the growing focus on William and Catherine has created a complicated emotional landscape inside the royal narrative. Not because Camilla is being removed, And not because Catherine is replacing her in any formal sense, but because public attention can become its own kind of power. When people begin looking toward the future with more confidence than they look toward the present, the palace has to manage more than schedules. It has to manage feeling. And feeling is one of the most powerful forces in monarchy. The crown survives through law, but it endures through belief. People must believe that the next generation is ready. They must believe that the family can absorb pain without breaking. They must believe that the institution can modernize without losing the symbols that made it recognizable in the first place. If King Charles III is indeed thinking deeply about William and Catherine's future place, as commentators suggest, then this is not merely a family matter. It is an institutional question wrapped in emotion. Was Princess Anne's reported role simply that of a loyal sister protecting her brother's confidence? Or does her presence in this discussion suggest that the king may trust her to understand what others might find too painful to say aloud? That is the quiet power of the story. It does not begin with a crown being passed. It begins with the possibility that the monarchy is already asking itself who can carry the public's trust when the next chapter arrives. William may be the legal future, but Catherine has increasingly become part of the emotional answer. And Princess Anne, with her lifelong reputation for duty, may be the figure royal watchers look to when the family needs someone strong enough to face the truth without decoration. But that still leaves the most sensitive question unanswered. If this reported wish was not really about succession, then what was it about? Was it about King Charles III's confidence in his son, his admiration for Catherine's steadiness, or a deeper concern that the monarchy must be protected before uncertainty has the chance to define it? To understand why the story has become so powerful, we have to look beyond the headline and into the quiet shift that had been building around William and Catherine long before the public noticed. That quiet shift did not announce itself with one dramatic ceremony or one carefully staged palace photograph. It appeared gradually, through the kind of details royal watchers often notice before official language ever catches up. The way attention gathers around a couple before they speak, the way public sympathy settles around familiar faces during uncertain times, and the way the future begins to look less like an abstract constitutional fact and more like a living presence inside the monarchy's daily rhythm. For William and Catherine, that shift has never been only about rank. The Prince of Wales was born into the line of succession, but public confidence is not inherited in the same way a title is. It has to be earned slowly, through restraint, visibility, composure, and the ability to make people feel that the crown still understands the country it serves. That is why some royal commentators believe the current discussion around the king's reported hopes has struck such a deep chord. It suggests that the monarchy's future may not depend only on who comes next, but on whether the next chapter already feels emotionally believable to the public. And that is a very different kind of pressure. In earlier generations, the monarchy could rely more heavily on distance, mystery, and ceremony. The institution did not need to explain itself every day, and the public was often expected to accept royal continuity as part of national life. But the modern crown lives under a more demanding form of scrutiny. Every absence creates questions. Every appearance is interpreted. Every gesture is turned into evidence of strength, strain, unity, or division. In that atmosphere, William and Catherine are not simply preparing for eventual roles. They are already being tested by the expectations attached to those roles. This is where the reported involvement of Princess Anne becomes more layered. If royal observers are correct that Anne's name has become associated with the king's thinking, then her importance may not lie in revealing a secret, but in representing a particular royal standard. The Princess Royal belongs to a tradition where duty is measured by consistency rather than emotion, by work rather than image, and by service that continues whether the cameras are present or not. Her connection to this story gives it a harder edge, because it raises the possibility that the question behind the scenes is not who is loved most, but who is considered most capable of carrying responsibility when the institution needs discipline more than comfort. Was this really about personal trust, or was it about identifying the people who could protect the monarchy from uncertainty? That question matters because the monarchy is not only a family. It is also a public structure, a constitutional symbol, and a carefully balanced machine of appearances, responsibilities, loyalties, and expectations. When the future begins to move closer, every member of the family feels that movement differently. For William, it may mean the slow disappearance of the final distance between son and sovereign. For Catherine, it may mean the transformation of public admiration into a heavier form of national expectation. For Anne, it may mean standing as a witness to duty at a moment when sentiment could cloud judgment. And for Queen Camilla, it may mean navigating a delicate space between the role she holds now and the future the country is already beginning to imagine beyond the present reign. None of this needs to be hostile to be sensitive. That is what makes the situation so complex. Royal power rarely shifts through open confrontation. More often, it shifts through emphasis. One name appears more often in commentary. One couple becomes the focus of long-term confidence. One royal figure is described as reassuring. Another is framed as transitional. And slowly, without any formal announcement, the emotional architecture of the monarchy begins to rearrange itself. According to some royal watchers, this is what may be happening around William and Catherine. The public has long understood that they are the future king and queen, but increasingly, they are spoken about as the stabilizing center of the monarchy's next era. That distinction is important. Being next is a matter of succession. Being seen as necessary is a matter of trust. And if the king's reported wishes have become part of that conversation, then the implication is not simply that Charles recognizes the obvious line of inheritance. It is that he may understand how much the monarchy's survival now depends on public belief in the couple who will one day carry it forward. For Catherine, that belief carries its own quiet burden. Public affection can appear gentle from the outside, but inside royal life, affection becomes expectation. The more people see her as calm, gracious, and steady, the more they look to her during moments of tension. The more she is described as the future of the monarchy, the less room she is given to simply be human in public. This is one reason the discussion around her role feels so emotionally powerful. She is not being imagined merely as a supportive royal wife. She is increasingly being interpreted as part of the monarchy's emotional protection. And that creates a question the palace cannot easily answer. How much can one family be asked to carry before duty begins to reshape everything around them? William's position is equally complicated, though in a different way. The future king must appear ready without appearing eager. He must support his father's reign while preparing for his own. He must project confidence without making the present monarchy look fragile. That balancing act has always been difficult for heirs, but it becomes even more delicate when public conversation begins to move ahead of official reality. If people start speaking of William and Catherine as the monarchy's answer before the crown has passed, then the palace must manage a future that is emotionally arriving before it is constitutionally here. That is why Section 2 of the story moves beyond the headline. The real issue is not whether William will one day be king. That much is already clear. The real issue is whether the monarchy is quietly entering a period where public imagination, palace planning, and family emotion are beginning to overlap in ways no one can fully control. Once those forces start moving together, even a reported wish, an interpreted gesture, or a symbolic association with princess, and can feel larger than the facts immediately surrounding it. And then there is the question of Queen Camilla's place in this delicate transition. Officially, her role remains clear. She is the king's wife and queen consort, standing beside him in the present reign. But emotionally, royal observers have often suggested that Camilla's public story has always been more complicated than Catherine's. Catherine is widely framed as the future, the mother of the next generation, and the figure many people associate with continuity. Camilla's role, by contrast, is tied closely to Charles himself and to the long journey that brought her to public acceptance. That does not diminish her position, but it does make the future more sensitive. Because if the reported focus of the king's confidence has moved toward William and Catherine as the monarchy's long-term stabilizers, then Camilla may find herself in a role that is respected but increasingly bounded by time. Not removed, not rejected, but surrounded by the quiet reality that the public conversation is already looking beyond the current reign. And in royal life, being looked past can be as painful as being openly challenged. This is why the story has begun to feel larger than one alleged royal wish. It touches the emotional chain of succession, the burden of preparation, the difference between affection and authority, and the way public trust can begin migrating before any crown is formally placed on a new head. It also raises a more uncomfortable possibility, that the monarchy may be entering a phase where the most important decisions are not only about duty, but about who the country is willing to believe in when the next era arrives. But the deeper question was not simply who was being prepared for the future. It was who might feel threatened by the way that future was beginning to take shape. The idea that anyone might feel threatened by William and Catherine's rising place in the royal imagination is sensitive precisely because monarchy does not usually admit to rivalry in public. It speaks instead of unity, service, continuity, and family duty. Yet history has shown that behind the smooth language of the crown, every transition creates pressure, and every future reign begins casting a shadow before the present one has fully finished its work. That shadow does not have to be hostile to be powerful. It can appear in the way palace priorities are interpreted, in the way commentators compare generations, and in the way the public begins attaching hope to one couple while still respecting the sovereign who currently wears the crown. According to some royal observers, this may be the real tension beneath the discussion surrounding the king's reported wish. It is not simply that William and Catherine are admired. It is that admiration has begun to carry institutional meaning. For the monarchy, that matters deeply. Popularity alone cannot run the crown, but public confidence can strengthen it during difficult periods. And in recent years, the royal family has faced questions that go far beyond ceremony. The health of senior figures, the reduced number of working royals, the continuing distance from Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, and the wider debate over what a modern monarchy should look like have all created a more fragile environment than the palace would ever choose to describe openly. In that atmosphere, the future is not simply something waiting politely in line. It becomes a form of reassurance. And that is where William and Catherine's position becomes both valuable and complicated. The Prince of Wales represents constitutional continuity, but Catherine has become something slightly different in the public conversation. She represents emotional continuity. Her image is often connected to steadiness, motherhood, discretion, and the ability to appear calm even when the royal family is surrounded by noise. For supporters of the monarchy, that combination has made her one of the most important figures in the next royal era. But for those inside or around the institution, such public trust can create an uncomfortable question. If the people already look to Catherine for reassurance, how much influence does she hold before any formal change has taken place? This is not about official power in the political sense. It is about symbolic power, and monarchy has always understood that symbols can shape reality long before documents do. A balcony appearance can become a message. A seating arrangement can become a signal. A public absence can become a story. A photograph can be interpreted as proof of unity or evidence of distance. Within that world, the idea that King Charles may see William and Catherine as the safest emotional bridge into the future becomes more than family preference. It becomes a possible map of where the institution believes its strength lies. But was that strength being recognized, or was it being quietly prepared? That is the question royal watchers are likely to keep circling, because preparation inside the monarchy rarely arrives as one dramatic announcement. It is often gradual, almost invisible. Responsibilities increase. Visibility changes. Patronages become more carefully aligned. Public messaging begins to lean towards certain themes. The next generation is not simply presented to the country. It is tested in front of the country, slowly, repeatedly, and under pressure. If the reported discussion around the king's hopes has any truth behind it, then it may not be a sudden revelation at all. It may be the emotional language placed around a process already underway. This is why Princess Anne's presence in the story remains so important. The king's sister is not usually associated with palace softness. Her reputation has been built on work, steadiness, and a kind of royal realism that does not need theatrical display. If commentators are linking her to this broader question of William and Catherine's future, it may be because Anne represents the kind of judgment that is harder to dismiss. She is not seen as someone carried away by sentiment. She is seen as someone who understands duty when it becomes uncomfortable. And that creates another layer of meaning. If Anne is imagined as the figure who understands the king's deeper anxieties, then the story is no longer only about the Prince and Princess of Wales. It becomes about who inside the royal family is trusted to recognize institutional necessity before emotion complicates it. Was this about affection for William and Catherine, or was it about protecting the monarchy from a period of uncertainty that may already have begun? The answer remains unconfirmed, but the question itself reveals why the issue feels so large. Every royal generation carries its own unresolved tensions. Queen Elizabeth II represented continuity through long service. King Charles III inherited the throne after waiting longer than any heir in British history, bringing with him both experience and the difficulty of redefining monarchy in a changed world. William will inherit not only a crown, but a public expectation that the institution must become leaner, more relatable, and more emotionally convincing. Catherine, beside him, will inherit a role that is both ceremonial and deeply symbolic, because the future queen will be judged not only by what she does, but by how safe the monarchy feels when she is seen. That is an extraordinary burden for any couple, and it may explain why the reported wish has gained such attention. It speaks to something people already sense, that the monarchy is moving toward a future where image, trust, and emotional credibility may matter as much as tradition. The old language of duty still matters, but duty now has to be visible. It has to be felt. It has to make sense to a public that no longer accepts institutions simply because they are old. And in that environment, any shift toward William and Catherine affects more than William and Catherine. It affects Queen Camilla because her public role is tied to the present reign and to the long, difficult path of acceptance that brought her to this point. It affects Princess, and because she is often viewed as the guardian of an older royal discipline, the kind that keeps the machinery moving when public emotion becomes unstable. It affects the wider family because fewer working royals means heavier expectation on those who remain. And it affects the palace itself because every institution must decide when to hold firmly to the present and when to begin preparing the country for what comes next. That balance is never simple. Move too slowly, and the monarchy risks appearing unprepared. Move too quickly, and it risks suggesting that the present reign has already become a bridge to something else. This is the delicate space Charles must occupy. He has to strengthen his son without surrendering his own authority. He has to allow Catherine's public trust to grow without making it seem as though the future queen is being elevated at the expense of the current one. He has to preserve unity, while knowing that public attention naturally creates comparison. And comparison may be the quietest danger in the entire story. Because once the public begins comparing eras, people stop seeing the monarchy as one continuous institution and begin reading it as a series of emotional choices. They ask who feels more reassuring, who seems more stable, who appears more connected to ordinary families, who represents the future with the least difficulty. These questions may never be asked directly by the palace, but they exist in commentary, in public reaction, and in the silence between official statements. Some royal commentators believe this is where the reported focus on William and Catherine becomes especially significant. It may suggest that the monarchy understands its future strength will not come from ceremony alone. It will come from a partnership that people can believe in. Not simply a king and queen in waiting, but a couple who can carry the burden of modernization without appearing to abandon tradition. That is a narrow path, and every step along it will be watched. Yet there is still something unresolved beneath all of this. If the future is already gathering around William and Catherine, who decides how quickly that future should move? Is it guided by the king's personal judgment, by palace strategy, by public demand, or by the quiet influence of senior royals who understand the dangers of waiting too long? That is where the story begins to move into more serious territory, because a monarchy can survive rumor, speculation, and even family disagreement. What it cannot easily survive is confusion over where authority truly rests. And if the reported wish surrounding William and Catherine has exposed anything, it may be that the royal family is not only preparing for a future reign. It may also be managing the emotional consequences of that future arriving before everyone is ready to name it. But even that does not explain the most sensitive part of the story. Because the real question was no longer whether William and Catherine were becoming central to the monarchy's future. It was whether someone inside the royal world understood just how much that shift could change the balance of power before the public ever saw the full picture. If someone inside the royal world did understand the consequences before everyone else, then the most important part of the story may not be the reported wish itself. It may be the timing. Because in monarchy, timing can carry as much meaning as language. A message does not need to be officially released to influence discussion. A shift does not need to be announced to begin changing perception. And sometimes, the most revealing royal moment is not what is said publicly, but what the institution allows people to start believing. That is why the conversation around William and Catherine now begins to feel more serious. It is no longer simply about admiration for the Prince and Princess of Wales, or speculation about what King Charles may privately hope for the future. It is about whether the monarchy is quietly reaching a point where the emotional center of gravity is moving ahead of the official structure. The crown still rests with the king. The present reign still matters. But according to some royal commentators, the future may already be taking shape in the way the public, the press, and even palace observers interpret the roles of those around him. This is where the pressure begins to rise, because the monarchy depends on a delicate illusion of seamless continuity. The public is meant to see one family, one institution, one line of service moving steadily from generation to generation. But behind that image sits a much more complicated reality. Each reign has its own priorities. Each royal couple carries a different emotional meaning. Each generation must decide what to preserve, what to soften, what to modernize, and what to leave behind. If William and Catherine are increasingly viewed as the safest emotional bridge into the future, then the palace has to manage a transition of feeling long before any formal transition occurs. And feeling, once it moves, is difficult to contain. For Queen Camilla, that reality may be especially complex. Reports and commentary have often framed her role as deeply connected to Charles's personal story, his long journey to the throne, and the life he built beside her before and after becoming king. Her position is formal, visible, and historically significant. Yet the growing focus on Catherine creates a different kind of comparison, one that is not written into law but lives in public imagination. Camilla represents the present consort. Catherine represents the future one. And when public confidence starts leaning toward the future, even respectfully, it can make the present feel more exposed. This does not mean there is open conflict. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed any internal dispute over William and Catherine's place, nor any private confrontation connected to the king's alleged wishes. But royal history shows that transitions do not need open conflict to become emotionally charged. They become sensitive because people begin reading meaning into silence, into visibility, into who stands where, who is mentioned first, who appears most often, and who seems to carry the public's trust most naturally. Was this simply the normal movement of succession, or was something more strategic beginning to unfold? That question matters because the monarchy has learned, sometimes painfully, that public opinion cannot be treated as decoration. It is part of the institution's survival. In past generations, loyalty to the crown could be assumed more easily, protected by tradition and distance. Today, the royal family must repeatedly prove its relevance in a world that questions inherited status more openly than ever before. This means that the figures who generate reassurance become valuable not merely as family members, but as institutional assets. And that is where William and Catherine's position becomes impossible to ignore. The Prince of Wales offers the line of authority. Catherine offers something more subtle, but perhaps just as essential: emotional credibility. Royal watchers often describe her as calm, disciplined, careful, and quietly persuasive. Whether one sees that as personality, training, or public image, the effect is the same. She has become a symbol many people associate with stability. In a monarchy that must constantly balance tradition with modern expectation, that kind of symbolism is not small. It is strategic, but strategy always creates consequences. If Catherine is increasingly viewed as the future queen who can steady the monarchy, then every public appearance begins to carry added weight. Every absence becomes more noticeable. Every gesture is interpreted through the lens of what she may one day represent. That is a heavy burden for someone whose public appeal has often rested on restraint rather than overt power. The more she is seen as central to the monarchy's future, the more difficult it becomes for the palace to protect her from the expectations that come with that centrality. For William, the situation is equally sharp. He must prepare for kingship while continuing to serve within his father's reign. That requires discipline, because an heir can damage a monarchy not only by appearing unready, but by appearing too ready. The public may want reassurance from the future, but the institution cannot afford to make the present look temporary. If the reported focus on William and Catherine is interpreted too strongly, It risks creating the impression that the next reign is already being emotionally invited before the current one has had time to fully define itself. That is the tension at the center of the story. The monarchy must show that the future is secure without suggesting that the present is fragile. Princess Anne's place in this discussion makes that tension even more revealing, and has lived through enough royal change to understand how quickly sentiment can become pressure. She saw the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II become the standard against which everyone else would be judged. She watched Charles wait, prepare, and finally inherit an institution already transformed by grief, scandal, modernization, and public skepticism. If royal observers are right to connect the Princess Royal to questions about the king's hopes for William and Catherine, then her significance may lie in what she represents. The voice of duty reminding the family that emotion must eventually serve the institution, not overwhelm it. And this is where Section 4 reaches one of the strongest turning points in the story. The reported wish, whether literal or symbolic, begins to matter less as a private claim and more as a public interpretation. Once people start believing that Charles sees William and Catherine as the necessary next chapter, the monarchy cannot simply dismiss that idea without weakening the reassurance it provides. Yet it also cannot fully embrace it without raising difficult questions about timing, authority, and the role of those still serving at the center of the present reign. That is a narrow and dangerous path. If the palace leans too heavily into William and Catherine, it risks making Camilla's role feel smaller and Charles's reign feel transitional. If it pulls them too far back, it risks disappointing a public that increasingly looks to them for steadiness. If it leaves the question unanswered, the vacuum fills with speculation. And if speculation becomes the main language of succession, the palace loses control of the story at precisely the moment it most needs discipline. This is why public perception may now be one of the most consequential forces in the entire royal equation. Not because the public chooses the monarch, but because the public helps determine whether the monarchy feels stable, respected, and emotionally convincing. A reign can be lawful and still struggle for affection. A future can be constitutional and still need to be believed in. That is the reality modern royals face, and it may explain why every discussion around William and Catherine carries more weight than the palace might prefer. Historical parallels make this even more sensitive. Every monarchy must prepare for succession, but the British crown has often tried to make that preparation look effortless. The heir grows more visible, the next generation takes on larger duties, the public begins adjusting emotionally, and the institution pretends all of it is simply natural rhythm. But the process is never purely natural. It is managed, interpreted, and sometimes resisted. What looks like smooth continuity from the outside may feel like pressure from within. That pressure may now be gathering around more than one figure. Charles must protect the dignity of his reign. Camilla must maintain the authority of her present position, while public attention drifts toward the future, and may be seen as a stabilizing force, someone able to recognize difficult truths without needing to soften them. William must avoid the appearance of impatience. Catherine must carry growing symbolic importance without allowing that symbolism to consume her private life. And the palace, above all, must keep the story from becoming one of rivalry when it needs to remain one of continuity. But perhaps the most serious implication is this: the future of the monarchy may no longer be judged only by constitutional order. It may be judged by emotional readiness. The public already knows who comes next. What they are watching now is who seems capable of carrying the weight. That is why the reported wish resonates. It puts language around a feeling that may already exist, that William and Catherine are no longer simply waiting in the wings. They are becoming the measure by which the next era is imagined. Still, that does not answer the final question. If the reported wish has exposed the emotional direction of the monarchy, what does that mean for the people who must live inside the shift before the country fully understands it? Because the real consequence is not only what may have been said, suggested, or interpreted. It is what this moment reveals about trust, legacy, and the future shape of the crown itself. That is why the true consequence of a story may not rest in whether every reported detail is eventually proven, denied, softened, or left unanswered. Its deeper importance lies in what the discussion has exposed. The monarchy is no longer being judged only by the dignity of its present. It is being judged by the confidence people feel in its future, and that future now carries the faces of William and Catherine more powerfully than ever. For King Charles, if the reports and interpretations surrounding his alleged wishes are accurate, the question is not simply whether his son is ready to reign one day. It is whether the next reign already contains the emotional ingredients the monarchy will need to survive. Stability, discipline, family symbolism, public trust, a sense of calm that can stand against uncertainty. Those qualities cannot be created overnight, and they cannot be declared into existence by palace language. They have to be built slowly through years of public observation, disappointment, recovery, restraint, and renewal. That is why William and Catherine's position feels so consequential. They are not merely waiting for history to arrive. They are already living inside the expectations of that history. Every carefully chosen appearance, every period of silence, every return to public duty, every moment of family visibility becomes part of a larger national reading. The country is not only watching what they do, it is imagining what they will become. And once a nation begins imagining its future monarchs in emotional terms, the palace can guide that feeling, but it can never fully control it. For Princess, and the broader meaning is different. Whether her reported role is literal, symbolic, or part of wider commentary, she represents the old royal truth that duty is rarely gentle. It asks people to stand firm when others want reassurance. It demands clarity when family emotion would prefer silence. And place in this story matters because she reminds viewers that monarchy is not sustained by affection alone. It is sustained by those who are willing to protect the institution, even when the human cost is difficult to ignore. And for Queen Camilla, the meaning may be the most delicate of all. Her position remains part of the present reign, and nothing in responsible analysis should suggest otherwise. But the public conversation around Catherine reveals a difficult reality about royal life. The future can begin to gather emotional force before the present has finished its work. That does not erase Camilla's role, but it does place it within a moving historical frame. She stands beside the king now, while Catherine increasingly stands in the public imagination as the woman who may help define what comes after. This is not a simple story of replacement. It is a story of transition. That distinction matters because the monarchy has always depended on its ability to make change feel continuous. It must allow one era to pass into another without appearing fractured. It must honor the reign that exists while preparing the reign that will follow. It must protect the dignity of the king while allowing the Prince of Wales to grow in authority. It must respect Camilla's present position while acknowledging Catherine's future significance. And it must do all of this beneath the gaze of a public that notices far more than previous generations ever could. Royal observers may now be watching the small details more closely than ever, not for dramatic proof of secret decisions, but for the quieter signs of institutional direction. Which causes are given greater prominence? Which public events place William and Catherine at the emotional center? How often does and appear as a figure of continuity and discipline? How carefully is Camilla's role balanced against the rising visibility of the next generation? These are not minor questions. In royal life, patterns often speak before announcements do. The long-term consequence may be that the monarchy is entering a phase where succession is no longer only a matter of waiting. It is a matter of preparation in public view. William must increasingly appear like a future monarch without seeming to overshadow his father. Catherine must continue building trust without being consumed by the weight of expectation. Charles must shape his legacy, while knowing that part of that legacy will be measured by how successfully he prepares the country to believe in the reign that follows his own. And that is where the story becomes historically important, because the reign of King Charles III sits between two enormous shadows: the long memory of Queen Elizabeth II and the anticipated future of William and Catherine. Charles is not merely ruling after his mother. He is ruling before his son. That position is both powerful and fragile. It gives him a chance to guide change, but it also means his reign will constantly be interpreted as a bridge between what the monarchy was and what it must become. If the reported wish surrounding William and Catherine has revealed anything, it is that the future of the crown may depend less on ceremony alone and more on emotional credibility. The public must feel that the next king and queen understand restraint, service, family, hardship, and duty in a modern world. They must believe that the monarchy can still represent stability without seeming distant, tradition without seeming frozen, and continuity without ignoring the need to evolve. This is why the story was never only about one alleged royal message, one reported royal feeling, or one symbolic moment. It is about the slow transfer of trust from one generation to the next. It is about the private weight behind public duty. It is about the people who stand near the crown before the crown reaches them, and the way their lives begin to change long before history officially names the change. So what do you think? Was this simply one royal development shaped by speculation and commentary, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the monarchy? Are William and Catherine merely preparing for roles they were always destined to inherit, or are they already becoming the emotional center of the next royal era? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. Because in the end, the future of the monarchy may not arrive with a sudden announcement, but through the quiet moment when the public begins to believe it has already seen who is ready to carry the crown forward.